Hello from the Channel studio in London and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the programme that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. On the programme this week, African leaders call for fairer climate financing at the continent's first climate summit. Plus, after enduring historic wildfires, Europe faces record heat and floods intensified by climate change. African leaders have once again called for fairer ways to finance the world's response to climate change. At Africa's first climate summit in Nairobi, Kenya, speakers criticized developed nations for failing to deliver on pledges. Despite being severely impacted by climate change, Africa only receives about 12% of the necessary financing to cope with these effects.
Your Excellencies,
as African leaders gathered for a climate summit in Nairobi, Kenya, the president of the upcoming COP28 delivered this grim assessment.
The world is losing the race to secure the goals of the Paris Agreement. And the world is struggling to keep 1.5 within reach. Collectively, we must admit that we are not delivering the results we need in the time we need them.
It comes as African leaders call for changes to what they say is an unfair international climate finance system. Kenya's President William Ruto complained that African countries, some with high debt loads, pay 5 times as much as other borrowers in interest.
And the biggest contributor to debt distress in our continent is high interest rates. We pay 5 times more than others. Meaning that in fact, the architecture is set up in a manner that if you borrow, it will be difficult for you to pay. And that is why we need a conversation, and a very candid conversation, and we are saying this in all honesty, around how do we get concessional funding? How do we pay as much as others are paying? How do we get Africa away from paying 5 times more? Potential and opportunity are both futuristic. We want a fair financial system that treats everybody equally. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not too much to ask. A fair international financial architecture is not a fair proposition or an unfair proposition to make.
The inaugural Africa Climate Summit is focused on mobilizing financing for Africa's response to climate change. While Africa is suffering from some of the most severe impacts of climate change, researchers say the continent only receives about 12% of the financing it needs to cope.
This continent accounts for less than 4% of global emissions, yet it suffers some of the worst effects of rising global temperatures. I make a very strong appeal to the large emitters, to the G20 countries responsible for 80% of the emissions that will be meeting this week in Delhi. Assume your responsibilities. Developed countries must commit to reaching net zero emissions as close as possible to 2040, and large emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, with support from developed countries to do so. And they must also keep their promise to provide $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate support and fully replenish the Green Climate Fund. Renewable energy could be the African miracle, but we must make it happen. We must all work together for Africa to become a renewable energy superpower.
A joint UN-African Union report released at the start of the summit showed that Africa is heating up at a faster rate than the rest of the planet and enduring more severe climate and weather disasters such as droughts.
Africa, like many regions in the world, is warming faster. To give a number, so the actual rate of warming over the last decade is 0.3, which is higher than what we had before. And to give you another number, so in terms of the rate of warming of Africa, the number is 0.37. And if you remember, 2022 was the fifth warmest year on record, with a rate of warming around 1.15. The key message is that Africa, although is amounting almost 10% of the emission, the global emission, Africans seem to be paying a big share in terms of climate impact, because the climate variability and climate change is eating Africa in different way, in different sectors. So that seems a bit unfair.
Responding to the call for more financing, hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in sustainable development projects were announced at the climate meeting. On Tuesday, the UAE pledged $4.5 billion to develop 15 gigawatts of clean power in Africa by 2030.
The Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, Etihad Credit Insurance, Masdar, the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, and EMEA Power will join with Africa 50 as a strategic partner under the guidance of the UAE and African leadership to develop 15 gigawatt of clean power by 2030. Working together, we will deploy, and by working together, we will deploy $4.5 billion that will catalyze at least an additional $12.5 billion from multilateral public and private sources.
Germany also announced $482 million in financing, including funding for a green hydrogen project in Kenya. The United States committed $30 million to supporting climate resilience and food security efforts on the continent.
President Biden has now launched a program called Prepare, the President's Emergency Program for Adaptation. And he has committed that we are going to help at least 500 million people in developing countries, especially in Africa, to be able to adapt to the worst impacts of this crisis. He has committed the United States to work alongside African nations to lead the way in adapting to and managing the impacts of the climate crisis. And as part of Prepare, he is providing, or will fight with the Congress and guarantee that we will provide $3 billion annually for adaptation for the $12 billion program that he believes is essential in order to be able to do our part to adapt to this challenge.
African officials say the investments are welcome, but that a bigger transformation is needed. They plan to push for the expansion of special drawing rights at the International Monetary Fund at the upcoming COP28 Climate Summit.
Thank you, Excellency.
And still on climate change, after battling deadly wildfires for weeks, heavy rainfall has brought flooding to parts of Europe. Among the hardest hit countries are Spain and Greece, where floodwaters washed out roads and bridges, and emergency services fielded thousands of calls for help.
Water gushing into Madrid's subway as record rainfall caused deadly flooding in central Spain, turning streets into rivers of mud that swept away cars. In places like the tourist city of Toledo, so much water fell that small waterfalls formed in areas with stairs. Several roads were closed as half a dozen bridges were torn down by water overflowing the riverbanks.
We were very worried because we thought the house was going to collapse because of the huge amount of rain that fell. Everyone here is astonished because the bridge is broken, We didn't think this was going to happen, to be honest. This part of down here used to be a little beach, and now it's all rivers.
We organized amongst ourselves to make ropes with towels and bedsheet and used them to pull two young men who were grabbing onto the columns. We pulled them to the top floor and saved them. It was terrifying, very, very scary with small children, women. Nobody showed up. We were left alone to save ourselves. It was terrifying. At least 3 people have been confirmed dead. The intense rain comes after Spain, which has endured 3 years of scant rainfall that has prompted some regions to impose water use restrictions, endured an intense heat wave and persistent high temperatures in August.
I've never seen anything like this. This area I played when I was younger and with my kids. Sometimes this was just sand. Usually when raining it was no water or something like this, very little water, and if you have a look you see probably the level of the water was higher than me, so it's like incredible, honestly.
In Greece, at least 1 person has also been confirmed dead after intense rainstorms battered mountain towns. According to local authorities, the coastal port city of Volos on Tuesday saw the same amount of water falling in 24 hours as usually gets for the whole of autumn.
This rainfall was very intense, unprecedented. I am 44 years old and I've never seen something like this here before. There was a lot of water and for many hours, the amount of water was unbelievable.
Like in Spain, the storm comes on the heels of major summer wildfires that hit Greece over the past few weeks, with some burning for more than 2 weeks and destroying forests and farmland. And more than 20 people were killed in the fires. Similar scenes were seen in Bulgaria, where 2 people died after a storm caused floods on the country's southern Black Sea coast. Overflowing rivers caused severe damage to roads and bridges. The area also suffered power blackouts, and authorities warned residents not to drink tap water due to contamination from floodwaters. But while southern Europe was battered by heavy rainfall, Britons were hit with temperatures of up to 31 degrees Celsius. The heat wave caught many by surprise. Although record-breaking heat in June means the country experienced its 8th warmest summer since 1884, the country faced lower than average temperatures and periods of rain throughout July and August.
Yeah, I guess so. I think probably the unpredictable nature of it is a little bit alarming, and I mean, day to day it makes it quite hard to kind of plan things ahead, but yeah, I guess the bigger picture of it is slightly concerning.
Yeah, I mean, I've never known temperatures to be like this in the beginnings of September. I mean, I grew up around Margate, so for temperatures in now this time of year, it's not right. There's definitely something amiss at the moment.
I think we should take it more serious as it's getting worse and worse, and we should also think of the ones that come after us and the kind of world we're going to leave behind. And as it's getting warmer and warmer in Northern Africa and Southern Europe, I wonder if people can still live there in a couple of years.
It's undeniable that perhaps having sun for this long at this time of year is an indication that something is up with the world.
Scientists say the extreme flooding and heat experienced on the continent are related to a stalled-out weather pattern that human-caused climate change could make more common.
When Foreign Dispatches returns, we head over to Japan, where a company has created office pods that let workers nap while standing up. More on that after the break. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the program. Just over 2 years after the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan, humanitarian assistance needs across the country have increased dramatically. However, insufficient funding is the biggest obstacle to sustaining and expanding the humanitarian response, putting parts of the population in need of support at risk.
Father of 5, Baba Karim ekes out a living as a porter at a market in Kabul, transporting people's purchases on his pushcart. He says he used to make up to $5.50 a day before the Taliban took power in Afghanistan back in 2021. Now he makes a maximum of just $2 a day if he's lucky. Handouts from the World Food Programme have been crucial for his family, which includes 3 disabled children. But the WFP has cut rations to another 2 million Afghans this month and is warning of a catastrophic winter if funding runs out. People like Karim now face a bleak future.
The WFP have helped us twice. Both times they gave me $48 in cash. The amount wasn't sufficient, but it was something. I am so worried about what will happen next, now that the assistance has ended too. I stay awake all night and worry about the future of my children.
The reduction in rations comes amid growing alarm over shrinking aid for Afghanistan. WFP funding for food and cash assistance is expected to run out by the end of October. It says if no funding comes through, people across the country will struggle to get supplies during the harsh winter weather.
15 million people who actually need food assistance. But we've had to cut from March, 13 million people was kind of our winter planning period. And then in May, we had to reduce 8 million people from assistance. And this month, we're having to reduce another 2 million. That means 10 million people that we had served previously and who need assistance are going to bed hungry without any food assistance that WFP is able to provide. And of course, we're coming into winter, and that's always the hardest part for people in Afghanistan. And coming into winter with so little resources, where they've depleted their assets, is extremely worrying for us.
Afghanistan is emerging from decades of conflict under an internationally isolated Taliban administration. The group took over when US-backed forces pulled out in 2021. Now around 3/4 of the country's people need humanitarian aid.
We remain deeply troubled by the human rights situation, in particular the severe restrictions imposed on women and girls, whose rights to access education and work, their freedom of movement and participation in daily and public life have been eroded by a series of discriminatory edicts issued since the takeover. There are no Afghans who remain untouched in some way by the violence and conflict of the past 4 decades. Victims and their families continue to seek justice, accountability, and much needed, and at times, life-saving support. It's not too late to change the trajectory of the country and for the Taliban to change its policies based on the understanding that the respect and protection of human rights are essential for the prosperity, cohesion, and stability of the nation.
Restrictions by the Taliban on women, which have stopped many from being allowed to work, are an obstacle to formal recognition.
The Taliban asked to be recognized by the United Nations and its members, but at the same time, they act against the key values expressed in the United Nations Charter. In my regular discussions with the de facto authorities, I am blunt about the obstacles they have created for themselves by the decrees and restrictions they have enacted, in particular against women and girls. We have conveyed to them that as long as these decrees are in place, it is nearly impossible that their government will be recognized by members of the international community.
The Taliban is also subject to sanctions, and central bank assets abroad have been frozen.
And finally, on the program, on a much lighter note, imagine a cafe where you can grab a quick power nap without having to lie down or find a comfortable chair. Well, it's a concept that might sound bizarre at first, but it's quickly gaining popularity among Japanese workers. Take a look.
If giraffes can sleep standing up, maybe humans can too. That's the idea behind the Giraffapod, a sleeping pod currently installed at a cafe in Tokyo's Harajuku district.
Every day, giraffes sleep while standing up for about 20 minutes. And just like that, 20 minutes a day is just right for a nap too. That's why we called it giraffe nap, because of the way giraffes rest.
The pod, roughly the size of a phone booth, has enough space for one person. It features cushions for the knees and the behind, and a fold-down headrest. With the cushions taking the strain, a giraffe pod user can grab a quick snooze while remaining upright.
If you lie down to rest, you could easily sleep for 1 or 2 hours, which would have a negative impact on your sleep during the night. We've promoted the idea of sleeping while sitting at the workplace. But with this giraffe nap, you can stand and sleep. It's great for a 20-minute nap.
The Swiss instant coffee brand has operated a sleep cafe in Tokyo since 2017, with the standing nap pods costing $5.60 for an hour slot, the latest addition to its seating options. While sleeping standing up sounds counterintuitive, initial reviews from customers are positive.
It was my first experience of sleeping standing up. My body weight was more supported than I expected, and I was able to get some rest.
I thought standing up would be tough on my knees and stuff, but surprisingly, it didn't really put much of a load on them. I felt like it was a really thoughtful setup.
The pods are currently on trial in the cafe until September the 17th, but its maker says they are working at marketing them to offices and hospitals. It's an idea which could appeal to many in Japan, as Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development data, published in 2021, shows that out of 33 countries surveyed, people in Japan got the least sleep.
And that's the programme today, but remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Tenyola Oyetayo. Bye for now.